Hi, everyone. My name is Min Teo, and I run an early stage venture fund called Ethereal Ventures. And today we're going to be talking about making money in crypto. So maybe to kick off, could everyone just go around and introduce themselves, your project, and what you do there?
Hi, my name is Iskender, and I'm the head of product and strategy at ENS. ENS is a Web3 username and domain service that runs on Ethereum.
Hey everyone, my name's Colfax. I'm here with Privy, and Privy builds a simple way to authenticate and onboard users, so anybody can use your application whether they have a wallet already or not.
Hello, I just talked, so you probably know me. I'm Fran from Superfluid. We do subscription salaries in money streams.
Awesome. So maybe just to kick off, we can just jump straight into it. Like, are you guys monetizing right now? And how are you guys monetizing your users? What are your plans for sort of like deepening that monetization potential? It'll be great to sort of hear about it, given it's definitely something that has some challenges in Web3. So curious how you guys are approaching it from your perspective.
Sounds good. I'll start that one off. This might be the most boring answer up here, but we are a simple SaaS company, really. We have a SaaS business model. It really comes down to who we're adding value for, and Privy really adds a lot of value for developers and application builders so that they can not have to think about auth and user onboarding and really focus on the core innovation of what they're building. And so this could evolve over time potentially as sort of the primary target user of Privy may change, but for now, our target users are application developers, and very boring, simple SaaS business model.
Yeah, and ENS is also a very special kind of case. So we as like ENS Labs, which you can think of as the core engineering group, don't necessarily monetize ENS, but the protocol itself collects a fee as part of a Sybil resistance mechanism to prevent folks from like squatting on a name or holding it too long. So the protocol collects a fee as part of its Sybil resistance, and then that fee is used to like subsidize the cost of development within the ENS ecosystem.
And for us, it's almost the opposite. So the protocol doesn't charge fees, but there are applications on top of the protocol that charge fees. And the company behind Superfluid is building some of those applications.
Awesome. And I believe ENS and Superfluid have tokens out, right?
Yeah, there is a governance token for ENS, but I don't believe Superfluid has a token. Is that right? Well, yeah, when token Superfluid? And will they stream it?
Yeah, sorry. From an investor point of view, I do hear like, monetization equals token quite a fair bit, which I won't comment on. But I'm just curious how you sort of think about the interplay of, monetizing at the protocol layer and also managing sort of a token. And do you think that sort of presents any sort of friction? Does it sort of like, create sort of tighter network effects? Like, how do you sort of see the two?
Yeah, I think it can be quite complicated, and we do our best to make it really simple. So from the ENS perspective, the token is simply for governance. That's all it does. The protocol is collecting revenue as part of the Sybil resistance mechanism within the protocol. And then the people who are building on ENS are then trying to create value. So anyone can go out there and build their own business on top of ENS, but the like circular economy thing of you drop a token and that's your monetization strategy, and the longer you can keep the Ponzi mechanic of your token going is how you capitalize on what you've built, isn't sustainable. And I think builders, depending on what level you're at, you can look at different ways to introduce more organic, long-term types of monetization strategies that actually better align with what you're doing. I think looking at like traditional SaaS models and how they might interact with your business, even if you are building like new Web3 primitives, there tends to be a lot of overlap. But I agree, there's a sentiment that like I can just build something cool and then drop a token, and I have effectively monetized what I've built, and I don't believe that's the right way going forward.
Yeah, I disagree. I think Ponzi's can be sustainable. Look at Social Security; it's working very well. But that said, I generally agree we should look more at SaaS, and stuff that works in Web 2 can work in Web 3. We're creating a lot of things but not necessarily this one. You know, SaaS works. We should look at it. You know, dropping a token and then your monetization is done is clearly not smart. I agree. I think it's you should think more about how the token helps you monetize better, not necessarily the token being your monetization, right? So I think there's a lot that we haven't seen yet there.
Yeah, and on that note, I've seen a lot of projects that have a token and they look at that like as an end, but then some of the questions I always ask is like, how can this not just have been done with like USD? Like, why is a blockchain and a token really enabling something novel here? So yeah, I totally agree that you need more depth than just launch a token, and that's the business model.
Yeah, and I think, you know, question on when you guys decided to start monetizing as well. You know, for any sort of early stage startup, there is a tension or trade-off between attracting early users and bootstrapping the ecosystem versus sort of charging and ensuring that, you know, you have sustainable revenues going forward. Do you know how you sort of approached it within each of your companies? Like, was there some sort of metric that you were gunning towards before starting to charge? Or, and I guess any advice for people who are grappling with the same decision?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely a difficult one because at the beginning you could think like, oh, if I don't charge, then I can get more adoption early and that'll be good for my company. But ultimately, if somebody is paying for something, they'll only be willing to pay for it if you're actually adding value. So I think that actually the earlier you start charging users, the sooner you'll actually really learn how much value you're adding for them. Because if you're adding a lot of value for them, they actually will pay because you're solving a real problem. And if they don't want to pay, that actually probably is pointing to a deeper problem that you should address sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. And I would also add that like ENS, for example, probably wasn't like having these types of like consumer application conversations at its inception, but because they had the Sybil resistance mechanism of the like annual recurring fee, they had that baked in. And that kind of created the culture within not only the problem that you were solving with your product, but also the community that you were supporting online, which is another component of what you should consider your product, became familiar and accustomed to having that revenue like built into the protocol. So I think it can be really hard to like provide a free product to your core user base for years and then monetize it later in a way that feels comfortable to the users, especially as they've become accustomed to having that feature set for free. So I think if you can, it's a case-by-case basis, but like if there is a strong reason to have monetization early in your product, it does a great job of like gating who actually needs it and is having their problems solved by your solution, and then allows you to have better dialogue, which you can then hopefully turn into a better product, which you can then hopefully turn into more monetization.
Yeah, in our case, we've recently reached a very, very mature point of the protocol. Like, there's not going to be any new major features added. Last thing that's coming out very soon is just being audited now. So it seems like a good time to start looking at taking on opportunities at the application level on top of the protocol. So there's a lot of opportunities to monetize that are more clear.
Yeah, and I think that's super cool to be able to build like a core protocol that you can then extend outside of like actually influencing the protocol, right? So like everybody has fair play when it comes to interacting with the protocol, and then you can take your expertise and build even more novel, interesting solutions. I think that's like a really cool way for teams to approach it. It requires a lot of runway, a lot of patience, technical expertise, but like once you get there, I think you actually build a real ecosystem, not a standalone product.
And to talk a little bit about early monetization from the Privy viewpoint, like there definitely is a cost for people to experiment with your product as an early stage startup. And so it's not just as simple as like, oh, if you monetize, if they're not willing to pay for it, then they're not interested. So what we did was we found partners to work with and offered some like early stage incentives for them to go through this experimentation period with us. And that can be another good way, but always keeping in mind that like the product is going to be a paid product in the future.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's, you know, with like Uniswap adding fees to its front end, it's very top of mind for people. You know, another consideration with Web3 is we do have this huge inclination towards open source. which does sometimes complicate things because, what is sort of open and transparent and auditable, what's actually a bit more proprietary to the company that will allow you to have that moat. I mean, there were so many Uniswap copycats. Like, we don't have anyone on DeFi here, but that's certainly something that makes it tricky to have a moat with which you can actually confidently sort of monetize without thinking that it's going to be a race to the bottom where you're losing users to your competition who are just undercutting you left, right, and center. So is that something that you guys like balance within like product design, or how do you sort of thread the needle?
I can take the first stab at that. So I think ENS has like very niche kind of problems within the space in terms of like usernames. So if you're building DeFi, this isn't, maybe there's principles in here that apply to you, but you'll see a lot of like username services pop up that try to offer like competing namespaces that don't necessarily integrate. And so from an ENS perspective, that causes like confusion because you're like polluting the namespace with like multiple kind of entities that can create collisions, which means like users' transactions could not like finalize. And so for us, this is similar in some concept to like how Uniswap can have a ton of forks. It's just like the same product that's not being like kind of like extended from the protocol. So in terms of like, I guess the question was like, how do you solve this or protect your moat? Yeah. I think it comes down to, is your core product like providing the solution to the problem you're supposed to be tackling? And I think a lot of times we can just like we can fork something and then add another feature, but we're not actually targeting a specific problem. We're simply just creating an extension of something that already exists in the hopes that we can sustain some kind of Ponzi. So I think if you are adding novel functionality to something, then you can kind of make that argument. But I think in terms of protecting your moat, like catering to your community that understands why your protocol or product works the way it does, and like having your community almost function as like a affiliate marketing group, right? Because if they understand the value of what you're building and why it's built this way, why fees are charged this way, et cetera, will be its own marketing campaign that will then protect the moat, because then these competing services will try and replicate what you're doing, but they're not able to fork your community, right? They can take small slices potentially, but they can't take the core of your community, and that's the engine that you should be running on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that makes you think of the concept of like the product isn't static and it's going to change over time. And there's so much more than just what could possibly be forked, even if you are totally an open source project. And so you're really investing, like users through what they're choosing to use are really investing in more than just what the core product is, but also like the team behind it and how that product's going to change, the trust that they put in to the people that are building what they're using. And I think from a company standpoint, really focusing on how to best serve users and moving the product, continuing in that direction, and making sure you're constantly solving the problems that your users have as well as you possibly can is a way to continue to keep staying ahead of possible copycats or something like that.
Yeah, I think another word for community is branding, right? So people still use Uniswap even though they have an extra fee on top just because it feels safe, right? And that's what I think the same reason people use Gnosis Safe all the time, right? Because even though there are actually a bunch of different interfaces, using the kind of official one feels better. And I think that's the intangible value of branding. Nobody can fork that. They can't fork your brand. They can't fork your expertise. And if you focus on being the best, that's the only line of defense, I think. I mean, have we seen any successful forks beyond the? I mean, Sushi worked for a bit, and with a massive scammer behind it. Yeah. What else?
Yeah, I don't know. One other thing I would add, though, is like I think Uniswap will prove to be like a great case study of what it looks like to take what I felt was like an undeniable moat in terms of like liquidity, and then kind of like put a fee on top of the front end. So I think like in the future we can definitely look back and study this, but I also think there's an opportunity to have both monetization on the front end, like Uniswap is pursuing, and as the technology improves, the ability to add monetization to a decentralized backend. Because if you can provably offer a service without having to like reveal the service, then that opens up a whole design space of like what's possible. And I'd kind of expect this trend to continue as like open source teams look for ways to like create sustainable monetization when they're not necessarily sure how to handle like all of their IP.
And with monetization so top of mind now for so many teams, do you think it should be the new like sort of North Star metric? Like if you look at say a lot of like Web2 SaaS businesses, they are literally looking at like cohorts and churn and like, you know, like retention, just month on month, like, you know, where's top line going? Do you think crypto's kind of there yet, or should we still be like focusing more on adoption?
I think we should definitely still focus on adoption. I mean, at Superfluid, we've been working in the payment space for a while, and even if we captured 100% of the market, that market went 10x, and we charged a 10% fee, we still wouldn't be anywhere near where we want to be. So I think the market definitely needs to grow, and that should be top of mind. But luckily, there's companies like Privy that are helping with that. So I think we should definitely still definitely invest in adoption. But that doesn't mean that monetization can be left aside. And the things you mentioned, like churn, I mean, you should think of churn even if you don't charge. Like, it's very important to keep your users engaged.
Yeah, I totally agree. We need to grow the market significantly for any startups really to even like be able to sustain themselves successfully as a Web3 startup. And one of the things I'm excited about working at Privy is that Privy enables people to experiment with using like a blockchain as a backend implementation detail, but like anybody can be a user. Whereas in the past, I've built like a Web3 startup where in order to even use it, you need to have all this knowledge and you need to basically enter the Web3 ecosystem. And so I'm excited to see the target user set that we can target by building these decentralized applications to grow so that we can actually then have sustainable monetization strategies. So I think it's a two-pronged thing where we need to focus on both, but definitely growing the adoption of Web3 is a big one.
Yeah, I think in terms of adoption, we're still kind of early, and I know we have like new primitives like account abstraction, PWAs, but I think one of the things that is kind of missing in that is like standardization in terms of like how we as an ecosystem are able to bring like an app to market. I think things in the future like the EU kind of like allowing iPhones to sideload an app, meaning like you can have an alternative app store and bring that app onto iPhone. I think that type of marketplace gives like a real chance for like consumer adoption to flourish because the user experience doesn't necessarily have to change. I know FriendTech has a button, it's like add the emote like to your homepage or whatever on your phone, but it's like, that's a good experience, but it's still not the best experience. And so I think we still have to kind of overweight how we as an industry are looking at things in the sense of focusing on infrastructure to be able to create those types of experiences. But I think we're right at the point where we start to go parabolic in our ability to build these types of applications. So it's a great time to be building, but I think there's like there are still some big hurdles in terms of how we can build that out for like actually onboarding 1 billion users. Like if you've onboarded people to your app, you know it's painful. So like imagining 1 billion people doing that at scale, there's a lot of abstraction required.
Yeah, all fantastic points. And shifting gears a little bit, I think, we always thought about Web3 being different, but to be honest, like when I survey the landscape, most of the revenue generation sort of mechanisms are still very much like fee-based, either transaction fees, like API calls, or they're subscription-based. Have you seen any sort of examples of like unique monetization strategies, or do you have any sort of ideas on how there could be a very crypto native way of monetization that maybe is underexplored?
I think Superfluid as a primitive is generally a little bit underexplored. I think these new types of, I'm being so serious. I think these types of like Web3 primitives that like you don't see a lot of like Web2 use cases that you can see working today, like if we can extend those things out with the type of infrastructure required, like a world where streaming as an option for your finances is incredibly powerful for you as a consumer because you're like amortizing the cost of the thing you did throughout time. You know, it's like, that's kind of nuts. So I think there are more ways, including Superfluid, that we could be looking at this, but I think just like doubling down on how some of these new primitives can be leveraged and put into these upcoming consumer apps would be really cool.
Yeah, Superfluid is cool. I agree. But I think there's some interesting things that we haven't shared yet that we're building on Superfluid, which includes things like revenue sharing, and that's where I think we're going to see a lot of exciting stuff. So it's not so much about making payments. Like, making payments is easy in Web 2 as well. What's actually hard is making payouts. So if you look at the technology to scalably, for example, pay for referral marketing, it usually takes 90 days to get a payment, right? Imagine being able to do that every second very efficiently with no costs. Those are the kinds of things we can do on chain that I think are not directly new monetization methods, but they tie into more traditional monetization like subscriptions and add new dimensions to it that we haven't explored yet. Being able to invest in someone else's revenue is also something that in Web3 is going to be pretty big. Right now we talk about it, there are some early examples, but I expect that is probably going to be how a lot of people get their first exposure to crypto. So a company that uses Superfluid actually builds royalty streaming. So you can buy an NFT and then you receive some of the royalties from a Rihanna song. And the people buying those NFTs can buy it with debit card. So they're buying with debit card and then they receive a stream of USDC, right? So their first interaction with Web3 might be through a Privy wallet, a debit card, but then from there they receive like a perpetual stream of stable coins, right? So I think that's a new way that we can onboard people without asking them to, buy Bitcoin, right? Like, this is something more close to them.
And on that note of users being more in control of, like, basically the shift that I'm excited about with Web3 is in Web 2, a lot of business models are actually based on monetizing the users of the applications, and a shift that we can see with Web3 is users becoming in control of their own data and how they use that. And so this isn't an exact direct answer to what the monetization will look like, but I'm excited to see what will be enabled by users being in control of their own data and in control of their own music, for example, like in the royalties use case and things like that, and what that can enable.
Yeah, I think those models are super cool too, definitely. Things that separate like Web3 from Web 2. I think one thing that we are missing in the Web3 paradigm is sort of probably like better billing tools for people. Like, we don't really have a Stripe, that makes it super easy for people to charge. Like, from your perspective, like, what kind of tools do we need to help founders monetize better?
I'm biased, but onboarding. Like, onboarding users, bringing them, allowing them to use and interact with the blockchain without having to learn a whole bunch of different things, and in a simple way, as simple as it is to check your email. And then also, I would say on-ramps is another big one. It's very interrelated to that. But a lot of us, maybe in this room, probably don't need to onboard money on chain because we already have, I don't know, some tokens that we can use to interact with apps. But that's like a pretty big friction point for somebody to even enter into the ecosystem.
Yeah, I would say kind of like understanding the legalization of cryptocurrency globally from like a global point of view is like a huge thing. Like, I've always wondered why like Deal, which is like a payments and like contractor management platform, couldn't be a Web3 platform. And really what they tackled was the ability to like hire globally, like at scale for companies. And I think these types of applications are like almost ethos aligned in a sense, but they aren't built on the same technological rails that we have. So I think understanding the gaps that they're able to fill that we currently don't have filled would help us better build the infrastructure required to like to do that kind of stuff.
First off, I hope we never have crypto Stripe, in the sense that their monopoly is something that I don't think is great in general. Not that they have a complete monopoly, but even just in the startup sector, right? Everybody uses Stripe. there are a lot of checkout companies. Superfluid's built a checkout as well. But I actually agree with Colfax. In my opinion, the problem's on let's say, the software on the payer side. It's not so much on the recipient end. A lot of people have built checkouts, but wallets are actually not supporting payments. And one of the reasons for that is there's no point. The way MetaMask makes money is not by helping you spend to buy something. And most people hold their money in Binance, and Binance has no incentive to help you spend the money from there. You're literally reducing their AUM, right? So I think there's a problem there, right? Because every application that people hold their money in is generally invested in the store value use case. And until that's, while that's the case, while everybody thinks of crypto as a store of value and all the software they use gears towards thinking of crypto as a store of value, imagining payments are going to happen is, unlikely.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it would be dope to have a crypto Stripe, but in the sense of if Stripe was a protocol and then everyone could build their own kind of front ends on top of this to do this kind of stuff, I don't see why we couldn't replicate that type of functionality. The market has proven it's useful in some sense, and if we're trying to speed run TradFi so that we can actually get into the dope shit later, it makes sense to me that we would speed run through what Web3 Stripe looks like so that somebody else could be well, this thing is whack, and then build the next new thing. So if you're building Web3 Stripe, please tell me.
Yeah, I think Stripe might be building Web3 Stripe, to be honest, and it might not be a bad thing if they have the banking relationships and we don't get debanked. It's all for the better. I think we're approaching the end soon. Does anyone have a question in the audience?
So, in addressing growing market share, can you talk about maybe B2B partnership strategies with Web2 companies, and how important is that right now, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it really comes down to solving the really big problem for other businesses, and that's how you can create good partnerships, because people want to work with people that are actually solving a problem for them. And so just focusing in on how you can best serve. So a big thing for Privy not only is end user UX, which benefits the applications that are building on top of us, but also the developer experience of how do you integrate Privy into your app is just as important for us, because that helps us retain our users, which are these businesses that are building on top of us.
Yeah, I can tell you in my experience, I've been quite disappointed by Web2 companies quite often. Generally speaking, in the bull market, everybody had a crypto department. In a bear market, everybody's fired the crypto department, and we were dealing with the crypto department. So it's pretty drab out there. But I think it boils down to what Colfax was saying. A lot of these people wanted to use crypto or work with Web3 companies because it was fashionable. We weren't necessarily, solving a real problem for them, right? So I guess it's just really hard. And, we need to kind of gain back the trust of those companies and, in a big sense, do a bit of soul searching and find where we can actually provide value that they will be willing to buy. And then, that will cut through the bullshit and just get us to work with them regardless of where the market is.
Yeah, quickly I would just say working with Web2 companies is a public good. You should receive a grant for that. It can be really difficult, but it can also be very fulfilling when you're able to execute. I think the key is the kind of white glove type of service you have to give to educate them on why your product or protocol works and functions the way it does, and why that's actually better for them despite their lived experience. So I think just being prepared to educate is probably the biggest thing you can do going into those types of conversations.